This is my true story. I worked every day of my life so my son could live in peace, so he'd never know the hunger or struggle I once faced. I built a home with my own hands, brick by brick, believing that when I grew old, I'd find love and respect within its walls. But I was wrong. One evening, my son's wife looked me in the eye and called me a burden. My son stayed silent. That night, my heart shattered. But I didn't argue. I just made a one promise to myself, and that destroyed their life. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now, and please subscribe so my story can reach more people. It happened during dinner on a quiet Sunday evening. The smell of food filled the air, but something in the room felt tense. I could feel it before she even spoke. My daughter-in-law sat across from me, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp and full of impatience. My son sat beside her, staring at his plate, avoiding my gaze. I had been living with them for a few months, since my health began to decline a little. I wasn't loud, I wasn't demanding. I kept to myself, helped where I could, and stayed out of their way. But that night, she finally said what had been building inside her. She looked straight at me, and with a voice that carried no hesitation, she said, "You're a burden, Dad. You don't contribute anything here just like that. No emotion, no shame." The words hung in the air, sharp as knives. My son didn't say a word. He didn't defend me, didn't even look at me. He just kept eating, pretending he hadn't heard it. That silence hurt more than her insult ever could. For a moment, I thought maybe I misheard her. Maybe she was joking. But the coldness in her eyes told me she meant every word. I looked around the table, at the chairs, the walls, the home I had built with my own hands, and realized I was no longer welcome in the very place I had created. It wasn't just a sentence she threw at me. It was a verdict. In her eyes, I had no value left. I tried to swallow my food, but it felt like gravel in my throat. My hands trembled slightly, not out of anger, but from the weight of humiliation. I glanced at my son again, hoping for even a small gesture, a look, a word, anything. But he stayed frozen, trapped between fear and convenience. That moment told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in their lives. After that, the room fell into a strange silence, the kind of silence that burns through your chest and leaves you hollow. She looked satisfied, as if she had finally said something she'd been holding back for too long. My son cleared his throat once, but said nothing. The only sound was the clink of silverware against plates. I kept my eyes down and finished my meal slowly. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. When dinner was over, she stood up and began collecting plates, humming softly, like nothing had happened. My son stood too, gave me a quick nod, and walked away without meeting my eyes. I sat there alone for a few minutes after they left, staring at the half-empty glass of water in front of me. The room that once felt warm now felt colder than any winter night. I had heard stories of old parents being mistreated, but I never thought it would happen to me. I had worked my whole life, given everything I had to my son, and somehow ended up being treated like a useless old man taking up space. That night, I understood something painful. Love doesn't always survive comfort. When people have everything, they forget who gave it to them. I stood up from the table slowly, my knees aching, my chest heavy. As I walked to my room, I could still hear her voice in my head, over and over again. "You're a burden." The words echoed like footsteps in an empty hall. Each one hurt, but each one also woke something inside me that had been sleeping for years. I didn't know it then, but that sentence was the last thing she'd ever get away with saying to me. I closed my door quietly that night and sat on the edge of my bed. I didn't cry, I didn't shout. I just sat there in silence, feeling the weight of years pressing down on me. Years of work, of sacrifice, of love that had gone unnoticed. And then slowly, something inside me hardened. I decided that if they thought I was a burden, I would show them the kind of burden that leaves a mark even after it's gone. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, her words echoing in my head again and again. You're a burden." Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it louder. I could feel those words crawling under my skin, stinging like a wound that refused to close. My chest felt heavy, not from age, but from betrayal. It wasn't just about what she said. It was about who said it and who stayed silent. My son. My own blood. The boy I had carried on my shoulders when he was too tired to walk. The boy I stayed awake for when he was sick. The boy I once swore I'd give my life for. He sat there, silent, while his wife tore my dignity apart. That silence was the cruelest sound I'd ever heard. In the dark, memories came flooding back. I saw flashes of my younger days, working long hours in the factory, coming home with sore hands and an empty stomach, saving every coin just to give him a chance at a better life. I remembered the day I bought this house, brick by brick, watching it rise from the ground. I didn't build it for me. I built it for him, for his future, for his family. And now, that same family looked at me like I didn't belong there, like I was nothing more than a ghost haunting their comfort. The pain didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, wrapping itself around my heart until it became hard to breathe. I kept asking myself what I had done wrong. Was I too old? Too slow? Too quiet? When did I stop being a father and become just another problem to be managed? The truth hit me hard. I had given too much. I had given everything. And in giving everything, I had taught them to take me for granted. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I walked into the kitchen, greeted them, sat at the table. My son barely looked up from his phone. His wife poured herself coffee, ignoring me completely. The same woman I once called daughter, the same woman whose wedding I had paid for, whose car I had helped them buy. Now she couldn't even look me in the eye. Every movement she made was sharp, impatient, like I was an inconvenience standing in her way. When she brushed past me, she sighed loudly, as if my very presence made the air heavier. I wanted to say something, to remind her that one day she would grow old too. One day, her hands would shake, her body would slow, and maybe she'd need someone to care for her. But I didn't. I just sat there quietly, feeling the kind of pain that words can't fix. Pain that sits deep inside the bones. Pain that comes from love that's been rejected. When my son left for work that morning, he said nothing. Not a goodbye, not a glance. Just the sound of the door closing. I watched him go, wondering when exactly he had changed. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I'd made life too easy for him. Maybe I'd never let him struggle enough to understand the value of what I gave. I had always thought kindness would be remembered. I was wrong. In this world, people don't remember who helped them climb. They only remember who stands above them now. That day passed in silence. I stayed in my room most of the time. I could hear them laughing in the living room, watching television, living their lives like nothing had happened. The walls felt thinner than ever. Every laugh, every sound of comfort felt like it was mocking me. I sat by the window, looking at the garden outside, the garden I planted for my wife before she passed. She would have never allowed this. She would have stood up for me. Sometimes I wished she was still here, not because I wanted to escape the pain, but because I needed someone to remind me that I still mattered. When night came again, I packed my bag. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with quiet finality. I folded my clothes slowly, took one last look around the room that used to feel like home, and made a promise to myself. I would never let anyone make me feel like a burden again. I would leave with my dignity intact, and when the time came, they would remember what they lost. I woke up before the sun that morning. The house was quiet, still asleep, unaware that I was about to walk away for the last time. I sat on the edge of my bed for a moment, my bag packed beside me, my hands resting on my knees. My heart was heavy, but calm. There was no anger left, just a kind of quiet sadness that felt too deep for tears. I looked around the room one last time. The old dresser I'd built myself, the faded curtains, the family photo on the wall. It used to mean everything to me. Now, it only reminded me how far love can fall when pride takes its place. I moved quietly down the hallway. Every creak of the floorboard felt louder than usual, like the house itself was watching me leave. I paused outside my son's room. The door was closed. Behind it, I could hear faint snoring. For a moment, I thought about knocking, just once, to say goodbye. But then I remembered the look on his face at dinner, the way he stared at his plate while his wife threw her words like stones. That silence told me everything I needed to know. There was no goodbye to give, not anymore. In the kitchen, the smell of last night's food still lingered. The sink was full of dirty plates. I washed them quietly, one by one, like I had done every morning since I moved in. My hands moved automatically, the same way they had for decades, cleaning, fixing, helping. Even as I was preparing to leave, I couldn't walk away without doing one last thing for them. Maybe it was foolish, but that's what love does to you. It stays, even when it shouldn't. When I was done, I folded the towel neatly on the counter and turned off the light. I left a small note on the table, just 3 words. Take care, always. I didn't sign it. I didn't want them to feel guilt or pity later. I just wanted to disappear quietly, the same way they made me feel while I lived there. Stepping outside, the morning air felt colder than usual. The street was empty, the sky still gray with dawn. I carried my small bag and walked slowly down the path I had once paved myself. The same path that had led my son to his first day of school. The same one I had walked 100 times carrying groceries, bills, and hope. Now, I was walking it alone, not as a father going home, but as a man leaving behind everything he built. When I reached the end of the road, I stopped and turned around one last time. From where I stood, I could barely see the house. It looked peaceful, quiet, as if nothing inside had ever broken. I took a deep breath and whispered, "Goodbye," to no one in particular. The words vanished into the cold air, unheard, unanswered, but they were enough. I walked until I reached the main street and found a small taxi waiting by the corner. The driver looked at me through the mirror and asked where I wanted to go. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I had no destination, no plan, no one waiting for me. Finally, I said the name of a small motel across town, a place I had stayed once, years ago, when the house was still being built. Funny how life brings you back to the beginning when everything ends. When I arrived, I paid the driver and checked in. The room was small, with a single bed and a window that looked out over a quiet street. I placed my bag down and sat by the window. The silence was strange at first, heavy but clean. No insults, no tension, no pretending. Just the sound of wind and distant traffic. For the first time in a long while, I felt free, lonely, but free. I spent that day thinking about the years I had wasted trying to please people who stopped caring, about how love can turn into dependence and dependence into contempt. I realized that somewhere along the way, I had stopped living for myself. Everything I did was for my son, for his comfort, for his success. I had built him a life so big that he forgot who built it. That was my mistake. As the sun set, I made a promise to myself. I would never let my pain end in bitterness. I would turn it into something stronger, something lasting. They had taken my place in their home, but they would never take the peace I was about to find. That night, I fell asleep to the sound of my own breathing, slow, steady, free of anger. The silence that once felt painful had become my shield. The first few mornings at the motel were quiet, too quiet. I woke up early, out of habit, expecting to hear footsteps, dishes, voices, but there was nothing. Just the hum of a ceiling fan and the faint sound of cars outside. At first, the silence felt empty, but slowly, it started to feel peaceful. I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the world move while I stayed still. I had nowhere to be, no one to serve, no one to prove anything to. It was strange, after all those years, to finally belong only to myself. But peace has its own kind of pain. I kept thinking about everything that had led me there. Not just the insult, but the years that came before it. I thought about the nights I came home from work with my hands aching, my back sore, but my heart full because I knew I was building something for my son. I thought about the day I handed him the house keys, smiling like a fool, telling him, "It's yours now." I remembered how proud I was, how I thought that meant I had done my job as a father. I didn't know then that I had also signed away my worth in his eyes. Every time I thought about her words, "You're a burden," I wondered what kind of person looks at an old man and says something like that. Maybe she saw my slow steps, my trembling hands, my quiet presence, and mistook it for weakness. But weakness isn't being old. Weakness is forgetting the people who made your comfort possible. Weakness is having everything and still showing no gratitude. Some nights, I lay awake replaying every memory of them, the birthdays, the celebrations, the laughter. I realized that somewhere along the way, I had mistaken comfort for closeness. I thought because I provided for them, they would always love me. But love built on what you give can fade the moment you stop giving. That was my biggest mistake. I taught them to depend on what I could do, not on who I was. When my hands got tired, so did their love. I spent those days walking around the neighborhood, not because I had anywhere to go, but because I needed to move. I passed by families laughing on porches, children riding bikes, old men feeding pigeons in the park. Life went on for everyone, like it always does. No one knew that I was a man who had built a home and lost it to silence. No one knew that I was a father without a family. But somehow, that anonymity was freeing. No pity, no judgment, just another old man among many. One afternoon, as I sat on a bench near the park, I saw a father helping his little boy tie his shoe. The boy laughed, his voice echoing across the grass. The father smiled patiently, fixing the knot with his rough hands. It reminded me of my son when he was small. Back then, he'd run into my arms and tell me I was the strongest man in the world. I believed him. Sitting there, I realized how long ago that was. How quickly admiration can turn into embarrassment once money enters the picture. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. They didn't change overnight. It happened slowly. Every new purchase, every new promotion, every luxury. It pulled them a little further away from who they were. I had watched it happen and told myself it was just part of life. I didn't see that success had turned them into strangers. My son didn't lose his heart in one day. He lost it one comfort at a time. That evening, I took out my old wallet and found a faded photo of my wife. She was smiling, holding our baby boy. I stared at it for a long time, feeling something shift inside me. She would have never let this happen. She would have stood between me and their cruelty. For the first time since I left that house, I whispered to her picture, "You were right. I was too soft." But maybe being soft isn't wrong. Maybe it's just dangerous when you give it to people who don't deserve it. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to waste the rest of my life feeling sorry. I wasn't going to be remembered as a burden. I was going to remind them, in my own quiet way, who I really was and what my worth truly meant. That night, I called my lawyer. When my lawyer answered, his voice sounded surprised to hear from me. It had been years since I last called him. I told him I wanted to meet the next morning, that there were some things I needed to change. He didn't ask why. He had known me long enough to hear the weight in my voice. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay there in the dim motel room, thinking about what I was about to do. I wasn't driven by revenge. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply done being invisible. I had given my life to people who forgot I existed. Now I would make sure they remembered, but not the way they expected. The next morning, I ironed my shirt, combed my hair, and looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked old, yes, but not defeated. The lines on my face weren't weakness. They were proof that I had lived, worked, and endured. I walked to the lawyer's office with my head high, each step lighter than the one before. When I arrived, he greeted me warmly and asked how I'd been. I just smiled faintly and said, "It's time to set things right." We sat in his office for hours, going through documents, property records, and the old will I had written years ago. Back then, I had left everything, the house, the land, the savings, to my son. It felt natural at the time. I wanted him to have the life I never did. But now, looking at those papers, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't about punishing him. It was about restoring balance. Love without respect is hollow, and inheritance without gratitude is poison. The lawyer asked what I wanted to change. I took a deep breath and told him I wanted everything, every property, every investment, every bit of value tied to my name, to go to causes that would outlive me. I wanted the mansion, the one worth over $4 million, to go to a senior care foundation. I wanted the money I'd saved to help build a shelter for abandoned elders. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who once called me a burden would live in comfort because someone cared, just not the ones who should have. My lawyer hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He asked if I was certain. I told him I had never been more sure of anything in my life. As we began drafting the new will, I felt something leave me, like I was setting down a weight I'd carried for too long. Each signature felt like closure. With every line I signed, I took back a piece of myself that I had lost in their home. We finished just before sunset. The lawyer slid the papers into a folder and placed it in his cabinet. He looked at me and said, "This will surprise them." I smiled faintly and replied, "Good." Let life give them the surprise I never could. I didn't want to hurt them, but I wanted them to understand. Some lessons can't be taught with words. They have to be learned through loss. As I left the office, the sky was painted orange and gold. I walked slowly, feeling the evening wind against my face. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not happy, but free. I had nothing left to prove. I had spent my life building a house, a legacy, and a family, and they had spent theirs taking it for granted. Now, I would build something that mattered, something that would carry my name with dignity long after I was gone. That night, I went back to my small room at the motel, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window. I didn't feel bitterness. I felt peace. My story was finally in my hands again. If my son and his wife thought I was a burden, then they were about to learn that even a burden can carry a fortune and decide where it belongs. The weeks that followed passed quietly, but there was a strange calm inside me. The kind of calm that comes when you finally stop waiting for people to change. I went about my days like a shadow, unnoticed, unbothered. I didn't contact my son, didn't write, didn't visit. I wanted distance to do what my words never could. People often say time heals, but sometimes time simply reveals. And in those weeks, it revealed exactly who they were without me, careless, proud, and blind to the cracks forming in their own hearts. Then, one morning, I woke up feeling weaker than usual. My chest felt heavy, my breath shorter than it should have been. I had ignored the small pains before, but this one was different. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hand pressed against my chest, and a thought came to me. Maybe my time was closer than I thought. I wasn't afraid. I had made my peace. My will was signed. My affairs were in order, and my heart had finally let go of anger. I was ready whenever life decided it was time. I called my lawyer again that afternoon, not to change anything, but just to check that everything was in place. He assured me it was. Then, as if fate were listening, the very next day my phone rang. It was my son. His voice was full of warmth, almost too much of it. He asked how I was doing, said they missed me, said they wanted me to come home. I could hear his wife in the background, her voice softer than usual. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the words sink in, words I had waited years to hear. But then I realized something. They weren't calling because they missed me. They were calling because they knew. I didn't ask how they found out. Maybe someone from the lawyer's office had mentioned something, or maybe rumors had spread. Either way, it didn't matter. Their sudden kindness was too rehearsed, too polished. The same people who had ignored me now spoke like saints. My daughter-in-law even said she was worried about my health. The same woman who once called me useless. I listened, responded kindly, but inside, I smiled at the cruel humor of life. When people think they're about to inherit something, their memory becomes perfect, and their manners return overnight. A few days later, I agreed to visit them. My son came to pick me up. He looked uncomfortable, as if he didn't know how to talk to me. During the drive, he kept trying to fill the silence with small talk, how work was, how the house had been renovated, how his wife had started volunteering. I just nodded, looking out the window, letting him talk. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to watch. To see for myself how people behave when they think you're dying with money in your name. When we reached the house, my daughter-in-law ran out to greet me. She hugged me, something she hadn't done in years. Her smile was wide, almost trembling. She insisted I take the best chair, brought me tea, asked if I needed a blanket. Every gesture was perfect, like she had rehearsed it. But behind her smile, I saw panic. She was afraid that the man she once insulted might leave her with nothing. Over the next few weeks, she changed completely. Every morning, she'd bring me breakfast in bed. She'd call me Dad, her voice suddenly sweet. She'd tell her friends how blessed she was to have me in her life. My son joined in, laughing louder than he used to, agreeing with everything I said. It would have been funny if it wasn't so pitiful. I had seen fake kindness before, but this was something else. This was desperation wrapped in politeness. I said nothing. I just played along. I let them think I believed it. I let them feel safe, certain, proud of their act. I even thanked them sometimes to make it all more real. But inside, I was counting the days. I knew that soon, after I was gone, they'd sit in a lawyer's office with greedy smiles, waiting to hear how much of my wealth would be theirs. And when that moment came, they would finally hear the truth. At night, as I lay in bed under their roof again, I didn't feel hate. I just felt sad. Not for myself, but for them. They had everything a person could want: a home, money, health, family. But they had lost the one thing that makes it all worth having: humanity. And that loss, I knew, would cost them far more than money ever could. The day of the will reading came faster than anyone expected. My health had worsened, and I passed away quietly one night in my sleep. No pain, no noise, just silence. My last thought before my eyes closed was peace. I had done everything I needed to do. My story would end the way I wanted, not with pity, but with dignity. When the morning came and they found me gone, I imagined the shock, the tears, not of love, but of fear. Fear of what I might have left behind. Because when greed lives in a heart long enough, even grief becomes selfish. A week later, they sat in the lawyer's office. I can almost picture it, even now. My son in his expensive suit, pretending to be solemn, and his wife beside him, her makeup perfect, her face carefully painted with sadness. They probably brought flowers, maybe even spoke about what a good man I was. The same man she once called a burden. The same man my son watched being humiliated and said nothing. And now, here they were, sitting in polished chairs, eager to collect what they thought was owed to them. The lawyer entered, holding a thick folder. The room must have gone still. He greeted them politely, his face calm but serious. He began by reading my name, my date of birth, and the formal words that always come with a will. My son probably glanced at his wife, a quiet excitement hidden under fake sorrow. In their minds, they were already dividing the mansion, the land, the money. I can see it now, her eyes shining, her hand resting on his arm, thinking about the life ahead without me in it. Then the lawyer started reading my message. To my son and his wife, he began, who once told me I was a burden. At that moment, I imagined their smiles froze. The air must have turned heavy. I leave nothing, the lawyer continued, but the memory of those words. May they remind you that wealth without love is worth nothing, and comfort without respect is a curse. The room must have gone silent, not the kind of silence that brings peace, but the kind that burns. The lawyer paused before continuing, letting every word settle like dust on the table. As for my estate, he said, my mansion, valued at $4 million, along with all related assets and funds, will be transferred to the Golden Age Senior Foundation to care for the elderly who have been forgotten by their families. He read every word slowly, clearly, leaving no space for doubt or confusion. There it was. Everything they had expected, gone. Every dream they built on my death, gone in one breath. I can imagine my son's face, pale, stunned, his mouth slightly open, searching for words that wouldn't come. And her, my daughter-in-law, the woman who once told me I didn't contribute, the woman who looked at me like I was worthless. Her face probably twisted in disbelief. She might have even laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. But the lawyer wasn't joking. When he handed her a copy of the will, the reality must have hit like a storm. She fell to her knees, crying, pleading, saying things she should have said years ago. But tears after greed mean nothing. They wash nothing clean. My son likely tried to talk, his voice trembling, asking if there was a mistake, if maybe another document existed. But there was no mistake. Everything was exactly as I had chosen. The lawyer, calm as ever, simply told them that the documents were final, signed, and witnessed. Their faces must have been blank, drained of the arrogance they once wore so easily. When the meeting ended, they probably left in silence. No one dared to speak. Outside, the sun would have still been shining, but to them, it must have felt like night. The mansion they once treated as theirs was gone. The life they built on greed had crumbled in a single afternoon. And the man they dismissed as a burden had written the final chapter, one they would never forget. That's how life works sometimes. You don't always get to see your justice, but if you live long enough, it finds its way to the right people. My story ended in peace, not revenge. But for them, it will never end. Every time they pass by that mansion, now filled with the laughter of old souls like me, they'll remember the day they lost everything. Not because I hated them, but because they forgot to love me. The moment the lawyer finished reading, the air in the room changed. What had begun as a quiet, polite meeting turned into a storm of silence and shock. My son sat frozen, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly against the table. His wife's mouth opened, but no words came out, only a faint gasp, like she had forgotten how to breathe. The lawyer didn't look at them. He simply folded the papers neatly, his job done, his expression steady. The truth was out. The weight of every word I had written now hung in that room heavier than any curse could ever be. My daughter-in-law tried to speak first. Her voice cracked as she asked if this was some mistake, if maybe another version of the will existed. The lawyer calmly told her no. Everything had been reviewed, signed, witnessed, and sealed. There was no mistake, only truth. He read it again, slowly this time, making sure every syllable landed where it was meant to. To my son and his wife, who called me a burden, I leave nothing but the memory of those words. When those words left his lips a second time, my son lowered his head. The sound of paper rustling filled the space, small, meaningless noise in a moment that needed none. My daughter-in-law's hands shook as she covered her face. I imagine her mascara running, her voice rising as she began to cry, saying she didn't mean it, saying it was just a moment of anger, saying she loved me. But love spoken at the reading of a will isn't love. It's fear wearing a disguise. And I had seen that disguise before. The lawyer continued. The mansion, valued at $4 million, will be transferred to the Golden Age Senior Foundation in accordance with the decedent's wishes. My son finally looked up, disbelief spreading across his face. That mansion, the same one they had filled with their laughter, their arrogance, their unspoken resentment, no longer belonged to them. It would now shelter people who had nothing, people like me, people who were left behind. For the first time in their lives, they were the ones being left behind. My daughter-in-law fell to her knees. I can almost hear her sobbing, begging, saying it wasn't fair. But fairness has nothing to do with it. Life isn't fair when you humiliate the hands that once fed you. Life isn't fair when you take comfort for granted and call the giver a burden. Fairness ended the moment she threw her words like knives across that dinner table. What she felt now wasn't injustice. It was reflection. A mirror finally showing her what she had become. My son didn't cry, but I know him well enough to imagine what went through his mind. The regret, the shame, the echo of all the times he stayed silent when she disrespected me. Silence is a choice, and that day he learned that choosing silence can cost more than words ever could. I had given him everything, my youth, my strength, my life, and in return, he gave me nothing but the quiet nod of a coward too afraid to stand up for what's right. Now, that silence had spoken back to him louder than anything he'd ever heard. The lawyer, still calm, closed the folder and said there was nothing more to discuss. The will was final. He offered his condolences, but they barely heard him. My son sat still, his wife clinging to his arm, whispering frantic words that meant nothing anymore. I imagined the lawyer watching them go, their footsteps dragging, the sound of broken pride echoing down the hall. The same pride that once made them look down on me was now reduced to dust. Outside that office, the world went on. People passed by, cars moved, life continued as usual. But for them, time must have stopped. The mansion, the money, the comfort, all of it gone in a single moment. And in its place, only memories remained. Memories of every cruel word, every act of disrespect, every chance they had to be kind and chose not to be. Those memories would haunt them far longer than my absence ever could. In the end, they didn't lose my house. They lost the right to call it home. They didn't lose my money. They lost their own humanity. And as they walked away from that office, I hope they finally understood the truth. When you treat love like a burden someday, that love will set itself free. They left the lawyer's office in silence. The sky outside was gray, heavy with clouds that looked ready to break. My son walked ahead, his wife trailing behind him, clutching her purse like it was all she had left in the world. In a way, it was. The car ride home must have been unbearable. Two people trapped in the same silence they once used to destroy me. Neither of them spoke. There were no arguments, no comfort, just shame sitting between them like a ghost. The same house they were driving toward, the mansion they had treated as their pride, was now nothing but an empty shell waiting to be taken away. When they pulled into the driveway, I imagined she broke first. Tears that had once been rare now came in floods. She threw herself onto the steps, crying, shaking, pleading for something that no longer existed. My son stood nearby, staring at the house, his face blank. Not because he didn't care, but because he finally realized how deeply he had failed. Every brick of that mansion carried my effort, my years, my sacrifice. But it also carried his silence. And now, both were gone. Inside the house, the air must have felt strange. Every sound echoed louder. The laughter that once filled the rooms was gone, replaced by the kind of quiet that only regret can bring. I imagine my photo still hung on the wall, the same one they probably walked past every day without looking at. Now, they couldn't stop staring at it. My eyes, frozen in that picture, must have looked right through them, asking the questions they had no answers for. My daughter-in-law paced the living room, her face swollen from crying. She called my name again and again, as if I could answer her now. She begged for forgiveness from a ghost, hoping her words could undo years of cruelty. But forgiveness doesn't erase what's done. It only reveals what's true. And the truth was this. She had never seen me as a person, only as a shadow in her perfect world. Now that the shadow was gone, the light burned too bright for her to stand in. My son finally sat down, his head in his hands. He didn't cry, not loudly, but tears came anyway, slow, bitter, filled with everything he should have said years ago. He remembered the day his mother died, how I had promised her I'd raise him right. He remembered the nights I stayed up when he was sick, the meals I skipped so he could eat. He remembered my rough hands fixing the roof during storms, my tired voice telling him to keep going in school. All those moments came back to him like a flood. But memory is cruel when it comes too late. It doesn't heal, it punishes. Neighbors must have seen them that day, the rich couple who suddenly looked small. Rumors spread fast. Some felt sorry, others whispered that it was karma. But none of that mattered. Inside that mansion, there was no wealth left, no power, no pride. Just two people staring at everything they had and realizing how quickly life can take it all away. Days passed, and the papers arrived. The house was officially transferred. They had 30 days to leave, 30 days to pack up the same rooms that had once overflowed with comfort. 30 days to face the ghosts of every insult, every cold stare, every ungrateful word. My daughter-in-law begged my son to appeal, to fight it, but he couldn't. Deep down, he knew fighting would mean denying the truth, and the truth was that they deserved exactly what they got. When the day came to move out, I imagine she stood in the doorway, looking around one last time. Maybe she touched the walls, maybe she cried, maybe she whispered an apology to the air. My son likely stayed silent, holding the door open, too ashamed to say a word. The car drove away slowly, and as the mansion disappeared behind them, so did the life they thought they earned. The foundation workers moved in soon after. Old men and women filled the halls, their laughter soft, their gratitude pure. The place that once held greed now held peace. The mansion became what it was always meant to be, a home for those forgotten, not by blood, but by love. My name hung on the front gate, carved in gold, in honor of those who were called burdens. And so, while they carried their guilt, I carried my peace, even in death. Because the truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just waits, silent and patient, until the day it's finally heard. Justice came quietly, not with shouting, not with revenge, but with time. Months passed after they lost the mansion. The world forgot about it quickly, but they didn't. They carried it like a shadow that followed them everywhere. Every time they looked at a large house, every time they drove through a wealthy neighborhood, they saw what they once had and who they lost it to. That guilt didn't fade, it grew heavier each day. And that, I think, was the truest justice of all, not punishment by others, but punishment by memory. My son and his wife moved into a smaller house, far from the neighborhood where everyone knew them. The same woman who once filled rooms with arrogance now avoided people's eyes in the street. The same son who once spoke proudly about success now worked quietly, keeping his head down. They told no one the truth. They said they sold the mansion by choice, that they wanted a simpler life. But lies have a way of showing themselves in the way a person carries their pain. You can see it in their shoulders, their eyes, their silence. Meanwhile, the mansion lived on. The foundation repaired what needed fixing, but they kept the spirit of the place intact. They brought in seniors who had nowhere to go, people abandoned by their families, people who had been told they were too old, too weak, too much trouble. The rooms that once heard insults now echoed with laughter and shared stories. Every morning, the nurses opened the windows and sunlight poured in. The house, which once felt cold despite its luxury, was warm for the first time. My name on the gate wasn't just a symbol. It was a reminder that dignity cannot be bought or erased. My son visited once, months later. He stood outside the gate, hands in his pockets, looking at the golden letters that spelled my name. He didn't go inside. He couldn't. He just stood there, silent, staring at the people on the porch, old men talking, women knitting, everyone smiling. Maybe he realized then that this was where love truly lived, not in the mansion he filled with pride, but in the kindness that grew out of the ashes he helped create. His wife stayed in the car, watching from a distance. I imagine her crying quietly, not because she lost money, but because she finally understood what she had done. It takes most people years to learn the weight of cruelty. For her, it took one sentence, the one she threw at me without thought. "You're a burden." That one sentence took away everything she loved. That one sentence built her karma brick by brick until it stood taller than the mansion she once called hers. They never spoke about me again, not in public. But in their home, my presence lingered. Every birthday, every quiet night, every small success. I was there, not as pride, not as shame, but as the echo of what they lost. Because here's the thing about people like them. They don't lose because others take something from them. They lose because they destroy it themselves, piece by piece, until there's nothing left to hold. And me? I had already found my peace. I wasn't there to see their tears, their regret, their collapse, and I didn't need to be. I didn't write that will for revenge. I wrote it so that when I was gone, my silence would finally speak. My last words on paper were stronger than anything I could have said while alive. The mansion, the money, the memories. They all served one purpose: to remind them that love cannot be measured in wealth, and respect cannot be begged after it's buried. The lawyer later told the foundation my story. They hung a small plaque in the front hallway, with my words engraved. A burden only exists until it stands tall enough to be remembered. Every visitor who walked through the doors read it, and many of them smiled through tears. I didn't leave behind bitterness. I left behind a lesson, one written not in anger, but in truth. That is how my story ended. Not with wealth, not with applause, but with justice that needed no witness. My dignity stayed untouched. My name lived longer than their comfort. And in the end, the man they called a burden became the reason hundreds of others finally had a place to belong.